The cargo bay of the Aurelian dawn ran on a rhythm, piston hiss, chain clink, coolant drip, the punctuating cough of a pressure valve, an industrial heartbeat that never tired and never listened. It smelled of solvent and galvanic metal, iron burn, and the faint coppery tang of blood. Flood lamps turned everything into planes of hard light and deep shadow. In that glare, the guards were small men made large by exosuits, and the prisoners were large lives made small by tags. She stood at the center of it all, for meters of musculature and luminous skin, wrists cuffed in tritanium that rasped like sand when she moved. Seelith did not move often. Even the tilt of her head was calculated, a conserved motion, like a glacier leaning toward a valley. The shackles that ringed her wrists extended to a suspension frame bolted directly into the bay's ribbed decking. The frame accepted her weight with a slight, complaining hum. A light blinked on her collar ID transponder, biotelemetry, shock shunt. It had a name stamped into the casing, SUBJ-77 Velithra, Fem. The letters were neat, uniform, untroubled. Labels always were, beyond the ring of handlers and their cranial HUDs, beyond the stacked crates and isothermal tanks sloshing with gene broth and cut meat. The cargo bay doors framed a tiny rectangle of stars that drifted as the ship yawed. Between those distant lights and Seelith's eyes was a grid of laser detection beams, almost invisible until an atom of dust crossed them. The bars of her cage were not iron. They were the assumption that nobody would challenge the system that activated them. She had learned that assumption before she learned the dialect of her captors. Know your bars. A maintenance drone scuttled along the track above her, paused to skin her chains, then went on. When the drone's blue diode washed over her forearms, the light fractured and shimmered. Velithran dermis had refractive habits. Under certain wavelengths it made her look like she wore a sheen of mercury. Under other wavelengths the same skin drank light, a matte twilight. She had been told by a scientist once before the reclassification that Velithran's skin had evolved. Under the violent skies of a high-radiation world, a living compromise between mirror and shadow. The scientist had been very excited. Later, when the papers were published, the excitement turned into patents. Seelith closed her eyes against the drone's light and measured her breath. A long draw, a longer hold, a slow release through barely parted lips. If she listened into herself, she could hear the echo of her own heart against the frame's metal. She imagined the frame listening back, counting. Weight verified, one of the handlers said, his voice flattened by the ship-wide public address. 142.3 kilograms. Muscle density 6.1 baseline. Skin confirms no nanite infiltration, no embedded armory. Orders say keep her unblemished. Market pays better for unmarred surface. Market pays better for a high-grade cut. Another handler replied, surface is a wrapping. They laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter, not exactly. It was the laughter of men dividing a number into shares. Seelith watched them with the stillness of a weathered statue. The silver of her irises held a deeper amber toward the pupil, sun-struck by resin. That gold deepened when she remembered, and she could not help remembering. Memory for Velithra was not a private theater. One could not simply close the curtains. It was a second river under the first, running ceaselessly. In the river's eddies she saw the rooftops of Isith rise at dawn, their edges catching frost light, the air so clear it chimes, the smell of willow sap and the laughing harsh calls of the talon birds that nested high above the geothermal vents. She felt the shudder of the ground during the migrations, when whole herds of crest lizards turned the valley into a living carpet, and her mother lifted her to the cliff ledge and said, listen, they sing with their feet. Everything that lives sings with its feet. It had been a good morning. It had been a good life then. The Velithran clans measured childhood by seasons, not days. Between the seasons were trials. Balance on the wine-brace beams above boiling crevices. Bite into the bitter marrow of the thorn bulb. Swim under the ice and count the columns before your lungs burned. Their games taught the mathematics of risk and weight and trust. Their songs were long, and their arguments longer. They did not hurry. They did not need to. There had been time once to be enormous. A boot heel dragged across the deck plating near her left foot, bringing her back to the hard light. One of the guards, thin, nervous, skull scars where black market implants had been installed and then removed, stood at the edge of the painted caution line. He stared up through his visor. He looked like a child that had found a statue in a ruin and could not decide if it was sacred. "You're awake," he said, as if addressing a dog that might or might not bite. "I have been awake for 3 days," Seelith said. Her standard was slow, each word exact, no hissing sibilants. The Velothran mouth had evolved for low fundamental tones, carried in long-distance calls across chasms. Subtle human consonants were newer to her, but she had practiced on the squeal of hinges and the tick of cooling pipes. "Yeah." The guard shifted his rifle out of habit. "You sleep with your eyes open, then?" "Sometimes," Seelith said. "It confuses predators. Nothing on this ship's going to mistake you for prey," the guard said. And then after a beat looked embarrassed by the obvious lie, he moved back to his partner, who was checking readouts on a cart-mounted diagnostic. They spoke low. Her hearing picked out syllables: auction, tomorrow, orbital 9, hazard premium, biotech, keep the organs oxygenated. The words were unpleasant in her mouth even as sounds: oxygenated, premium, auction. She knew the stations. She had been loaded and unloaded through many of them in the years since the reclassifications. The word reclassification had arrived in a wave, a polite explanation carried by trained officials and backed by silent men with guns. The arguments that followed had been civil, at first. Then something besides civility had come to stand in the room. Seelith remembered elders with their hair bound up and their voices controlled, speaking of treaties, of ancient compacts with the Commonwealth. She remembered the officials with their tablet-thin smiles and their talking points. She remembered the moment an administrator decided so quietly no one noticed at the time to stop referring to Velithra as peoples and start saying populations. A syllabic swerve, a hand turning the knife. The river of memory carried darker water. There had been a canyon below Isith Rise. Into it, after the proclamations, the clan had carried their keepsakes one by one, laid them on the ledge, and sang to them. The blades carried through 5 generations, the stones worn smooth by ancestors' thumbs. The bone flute made when the ocean went black and the sky went green. They said goodbye to them there. Seelith had not understood then. She did later, when the ships came. A low tremor moved through the Aurelian dawn, the kind that meant reaction jets were firing, adjusting orientation for translunar approach. The star rectangle at the far end slid a fraction. In the corners of the cargo bay, pressure differentials became tiny fogs. On a rack 2 aisles over, animals from a gravity-warm world huddled against one another and made small distressed sounds. That did not belong in aisles. Seelith felt the ship turning towards Station 9. She had never been there, but she had been to other stations with numbers and the smell of leakage in the stairwells. She wondered, almost clinically, what metric would define her price. Mass, density, the novelty curve of the rich who did not need nutrition but craved the performance of rule-breaking. She thought of her mother's hands, calloused but neat, gutting a river beast and folding each organ back as if it were a prayer. A voice from the overhead speakers: all cargo units, final manifest verification. Notify control of hazardous primaries and live intelligence lots. Repeat, live intelligence lots require shock shunt inspection prior to docking. The handlers swore quietly. The nervous guard came back with a handcart bearing a block of equipment, its edges scarred. "Inspection," he said. "Don't fight. Don't do anything sudden." "I have not done anything sudden in years." Seelith said that he hesitated. "Sorry, you are not," Seelith said. "Not yet." The inspection rig extended like a cautious spider. Nodes touched her collar and spine. Something cold chewed across her nerves, like swallowing ice too fast. Her vision juddered, collected itself, juddered again. She stood very still. The rig finished with a satisfied beep, which in the universal language of machines meant you remain a number we can trust. While the handlers made notes, a woman in the pinched uniform of a quartermaster walked along the bay's central aisle, with a pad chirping in her hand. She moved quickly, eyes ticking across barcodes, inventory lines. When she reached Seelith, she stopped and did not immediately check the tag. She looked up a long look and something behind her face moved, a calculation or a memory. "Velithra," she said, almost to herself. reclassified livestock. One of the guards said, helpful, as if the quartermaster might somehow have missed the last decade. The quartermaster's mouth changed shape, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. I have a cousin on Orpheus, she said. He still tells stories of you as giants in the old way, mountain singers, bridge builders. Sealith held the woman's gaze. We were that. We are that. The quartermaster's eyes flicked to the collar, the restraints. Not today, no, Sealith said. Not today, you know the station. The woman asked softly. I know stations, Sealith said. Then you know, the woman said, and did not finish the sentence. She checked the tag with a flick and left, the pad chirping in a new rhythm. Sealith felt no gratitude for the exchange. She filed it beside the other words in the long inventory of words that could not change steel. She drifted for a time if drift was a word for the clean, impersonal passage of moments until her river of memory found a gentler bend. On that bend, she stood again in the shadow of Isith's tall pylons with her sister brood. There had been a test of patience that day. Each child set a slab of black ice on their shoulders and walked the wall's length without letting meltwater reach their wrists. If water touched skin, one was to stop, sit, and watch the birds instead. Most things worth doing, said the elder who set the slabs, happen slower than your hunger to finish them. Sealith had walked. She had watched the ice, not her feet. She had arrived at the end dry. Her mother had nodded, pride tidy and unadorned. Later that same elder taught them the clan's stance against storms, feet set, knees soft, back aligned, chin low, eyes forward. When the wind hit, one did not turn away or lean into it. One became a post that wind learned to go around. Sealith had practiced that stance since. In deep space, the wind had no smell, but it pushed just the same, docking in 12. The speakers said. The handlers began closing open crates, checking tethers, suppressing the fidgeting of smaller prisoners with quick puffs of sedative gas. Somewhere music played tinny, a popular song about winning, about being the one who dared. It bled into the machinery noise until it became one more repetitive pulse. Sealith shifted her weight. The chain croaked. It was a concession, not from pain, but from the need to remind her muscles they existed for uses beyond standing under. Weights. The nearest guard flinched, then pretended he hadn't. You ever see one of these run? He asked his partner, nodding at Sealith with the chin of someone pretending not to point. Like, before the tags. Nah, the partner said, eyes on his graph. I heard they could jump canyons. That was the birds, the nervous one said. The birds flew. The partner said, patient. Jumping is when you push off the ground. Basic physics, whatever, the nervous one said. And they both laughed again, but smaller. They were not cruel men, Sealith decided. Cruelty required imagination. They had none, only habit. Habit made better bars than iron. You never tested their thermostats or their customs. You obeyed them the way you obeyed gravity. Sealith watched the star rectangle fill with the broken ring of Orbital Station 9, its exterior plating a patchwork of bright new repairs and scuffed old panels. Tug drones crawled along it like fleas on a collar. The station's rotating habitation drums threw off a faint sprinkling of condensation. Inside the docking field, artificial weather, she thought, bottled and tamed. Behind the station, a ragged fog of debris drifted, lost fasteners, flex, a glove. The docking clamps extended. There was the tooth-on-bone feel of alignment. Then a thunk that went through the frame and into Sealith's bones. Pressure equalized. The ship rang once, an iron bell struck by a careful hand. The bay doors began to cycle. The atmosphere baffles our eyes open like wet pupils. The first wave of buyers was always the same, runners from syndicates with bright eyes and sharpened holo signatures, middlemen with frog-voiced accents and strong opinions about margins, quiet men in dark coats whose skin glowed faintly where subdermal screens broadcast encrypted sigils. Behind them, the station's bureaucrats in clean uniforms pretending they were not participating in a market because the market happened in someone else's language. A lawyer walked by with a case of printed contracts, an irony no one felt. Paper made people feel like what they were doing would last. Sealith breathed in the station's air, hotter, sulfurous, the smell of too many bodies exhaling and a few scrubbers catching up. Voices rose, thickened, took on the grain of money. Her transponder chirped as it synchronized with the station's commerce net. A price line propagated beside her identifier, a number of digits long enough to mean both everything and nothing. On the catwalk above, children peered through the mesh. Station kids always found ways into perimeter places. Their eyes were all reach, mouths open. One girl, her hair shorn to stubble, said something to another child and both giggled. Seelith did not resent them. Children learned from what they were allowed to see. If the world taught them to giggle at larger lives and chains, it was the world's fault, not theirs. A bell chimed, the polite signal that bidding would begin soon. A tall figure stepped onto the auction platform. The black sash of licensed authority draped over his shoulder. He took a breath, and the amplifiers made it a portent. His voice rolled out, close and far at once. Vendors and patrons, welcome to Sale Terminal 9. Please set your credential suites to open verification. We begin with fresh lots. Remember, no samples cut from live intelligence units prior to finalization. Penalties apply. Seelith angled her head, catching a reflection of herself in a polished tank across the aisle. The image staggered, elongated by curve, made monstrous by lensing. She did not look away. She knew that face. She had seen it in river water when she was young, and the world had still been sized for her. The quartermaster passed again, a crate hover leashed behind her. She glanced up. The smallest motion in her mouth said, "I see you." Seelith blinked once, slow. The wave Elithra signaled acknowledgement without announcing it to hunters. The handler nearest Seelith brushed his gloved knuckles to casual. Against the frame's release coupler. A subtle test. A tiny show. The coupler's light stayed red. He seemed relieved by the machine's insistence that nothing unexpected could happen. Lot 77, the auctioneer said. Velithran female, live intelligence, full mass, unmarried. Documented age 213 cycles. Certified pathogen-free. Use cases, processing, research, display. Opening bid. Seelith did not listen to the number. The river under the river rose, and for a moment she was again small, standing in wind, balancing an impossible slab of ice on her shoulder and refusing to hurry. Most things worth doing happen slower than your hunger to finish them. She centered her feet on the deck, knees soft, back aligned, chin low, eyes forward. The air around her moved with the convection currents of many breaths. Voices braided. Screens flashed. Men believed in numbers and in their control. The frame hummed. On the catwalk, the stubble-haired girl leaned forward and reached for the mesh, watching the giant who refused to bow dot in that electric pause before the first bid lanced the air. A thought, clean as a bell struck in clear ice, came to Seelith. If she could not choose the terms of her standing, she could still choose the way she stood. She stood, then mountain singer, bridge builder, last of her name beneath a ceiling of machine light as the world made a price of her. And somewhere, in a quiet pocket of the crowd, a single human who did not look rich enough for disaster drew a breath that would change the shape of both their lives. The air in the grand concourse of Orbital Station 9 was always just a little too thin. Not enough to choke, but enough to remind visitors that they were breathing a borrowed atmosphere. The architects of the station had insisted the sensation made people feel lighter, freer, more willing to spend. In truth, it made them hungrier, more restless, and more desperate. It was a fitting atmosphere for a place like this. The auction hall stretched like a cathedral of commerce, 1,000 meters of polished alloy and towering holoscreens, where fortunes changed hands in the span of a heartbeat. At its center, the primary podium rose like an altar, bathed in sterile white light. Round it, tiered balconies thrummed with activity. Buyers and brokers in elaborate silks and exosuits. Syndicate representatives whispering in coded tongue. Corporate scouts with eyes replaced by dated dash lenses. Here, nothing was sacred. Here, everything had a price. The parade of flushed auction began with the usual warm-up lots. Gene-spliced cattle. From the methane plains of demos for bulk shipments of vat-grown protein, and a few exotic creatures from the unexplored edges of the Perseus Rift. These drew mild bids. Polite applause. Everyone was waiting for the main attractions. The first intelligent lot, a clutch of Gieler hatchlings, fetched over 8 million credits before the gavel even fell. Minimal education, high fertility, the auctioneer purred, his voice a precise blend of charm and cruelty. Perfect for colony labor or recreational companionship. Laughter rippled across the room. Next came a trio of Sith-Rocky gladiators, their bodies marked by ritual scars and their wills broken by electroconditioning. Bids soared higher. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring like predators scenting blood, and then the lights dimmed. Ladies and gentlemen, and all identities beyond, the auctioneer boomed, his tone shifting into a reverent hush. The next lot is a rarity beyond measure, one of the last of a species once feared across the spiral arm, a living relic of a civilization older than Earth's first cities. A low hum rippled through the hall. Screens flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image of Sealith. Lot 77, the Titan platform rose from the floor with a hiss of hydraulics. Sealith stood upon it, still shackled, still silent, the silver sheen of her skin glowing beneath the light. Even here, surrounded by thousands, she dominated the space. The very air seemed to bend around her presence. Lot 77, the auctioneer announced. Velithran female. Designation, Sealith. Age, 213 standard cycles. Verified weight, 1,482 kilograms. Neural mapping, intact. Reproductive potential, negligible. Market classification, livestock, research specimen, or display acquisition. A few scattered boos at the word display. It was considered gauche to admit one was buying sentience as trophies. Though it happened every day, the auctioneer smiled. Of course, buyers may do as they wish with their purchase. No post-sale restrictions apply. The crowd's murmur thickened, turning from polite interest to hunger. Shall we begin? Opening bid, 10 million credits. Hands went up immediately. Numbers soared, 15 million, 17, 22. The bids came from everywhere. The Vadran Culinary Syndicate, known for serving rare sentient flesh at private banquets. The Triumvirate Research Collective, whose vivisection labs were whispered about in every slave ring from Mars to Nera Prime. Even a noble from the Illyrian houses, who specialized in displaying unique acquisitions as garden statuary. Sealith heard none of it. Or rather, she heard it all, but the words were distant, dulled as if spoken underwater. Her mind retreated deep within, to the slow, steady heartbeat of her people's songs. They had once sung to call storms. Now, the storm was here, and she was its prize, too big to breed, too costly to keep, too proud to spare. The stranger in the upper balcony, near the edge of the crowd where the shadows pooled. Oren Calvin stood with his hands in his pockets, trying not to tremble. He was far from the richest man in this room. In fact, he was not rich at all, the heir to a once prominent Terran house. He had inherited nothing but debt and a name heavy with expectation. His family had made their fortune centuries ago on colonization contracts, seeding new worlds, terraforming new frontiers, but their wealth had bled away over generations of complacency and political failure. Now Oren had only two things left, a trust fund he had never touched, and a question that had haunted him since childhood. Why must survival require cruelty? He had come to the auction out of morbid curiosity, to see, for himself, the barbarity that polite society pretended not to see. But when Sealith stepped onto that platform, something shifted. He had read about the Velithra as a child, tucked away in half-forgotten xenobiology texts, architects of moon bridges, speakers to tectonic storms, builders of songs that lasted centuries. And now, here stood the last of them, reduced to a line item. The bids climbed past 30 million, 40, 50. And still, Oren could not look away. The bid that stopped the room, 55 million, shouted a Vadran delegate, her voice laced with amusement. And I'll cover the transport fees myself. The auctioneer grinned. A generous offer. Do I hear 60? Silence. For the first time, the bidding slowed. Even the wealthiest syndicates hesitated. A Velithran was a novelty, yes, but a useless one. No reproduction potential. No combat applications. Too large for most research facilities. Beyond a certain point, the investment made no sense. Go in once, the auctioneer said. Going twice, Oren raised his hand. Bid, he said, voice steady though his heart thundered. 70 million credits. A wave of gasps rolled through the hall. Heads turned. Holo cameras focused. The auctioneer blinked. 70 million. He repeated, incredulous. Sir, please confirm, that is your final offer? It is, Oren said, pulling a slender black card from his coat and placing it on the bidder's pedestal. All holdings of House Calvin. Every credit I possess. The room erupted. Shock, laughter, scorn. Is he mad? Someone hissed. House Calvin is finished. Another sneered. Wasting that fortune on a carcass. The Vadran delegate raised a finger, then hesitated. Even for her syndicate, 70 million was too steep for a meal. One by one, the other bidders withdrew. It was no longer a contest worth winning. The auctioneer looked from the display to Oren, then to Seelith. Final call. Go in once. Twice. Sold. The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed through the hall like a cannon shot. The claimer Seelith's eyes snapped open. The crowd had begun to disperse, some shaking their heads, others laughing at the spectacle. A single figure moved against the flow, striding toward the platform as station personnel unlocked the restraints. She expected another butcher, another profiteer, another collector. Instead, she saw a man young, unarmed, dressed not in wealth but in sincerity. His hands shook slightly as he approached, but his eyes did not waver. Do you understand what you've done? One of the handlers hissed. You've just ruined your entire house. Oren ignored him. He stepped closer until he stood beneath Seelith's towering gaze. The Giantess loomed over him, her presence filling the space like a storm cloud. Why? She asked, voice deep and resonant, like stone grinding against stone. Why buy what you cannot use? Because you're not something to use, Oren said softly. You're someone. For a long, unmeasurable moment, Seelith stared at him, searching for mockery, for pity, for the hunger she had seen in so many eyes. She found none, only a quiet, stubborn resolve. Your people called us beasts, she said. They called us obsolete. They called us meat. They were wrong, he replied. And I intend to prove it. A strange sensation stirred within her, not trust, not hope, but the faintest ember of something she had not felt in decades. Curiosity. Very well, human. She rumbled. You have purchased a storm. Let us see if you can weather it. And as the guards unshackled her and the crowd whispered of madness and ruin, Oren Calvin, last son of a forgotten house, walked beside the last daughter of a dying species. Neither of them knew it then, but the auction was not the end. It was the beginning of a bond that would defy empires, and a story that would reshape the destiny of two species. The crowd dispersed, the ledger closed, and Lot 77 was marked claimed. But somewhere deep in the data cores of Orbital Station 9, a single notation blinked red and refused to archive. The Celestini was nothing like the slave barges Seelith had known. It was small, almost insultingly so compared to the towering dreadnoughts that ferried sentient cargo, and painfully outdated. A mid-range survey vessel retrofitted into a mobile lab. The carters were narrow, the gravity plating inconsistent, and the engine hummed with an uneven heartbeat. Yet for all its imperfections, the ship felt different. Not a prison, not a cage. It felt alive. And, for the first time in decades, so was she a cage. Unlocked. The first thing Oren Calvin did after leaving Orbital Station 9 was deactivate the shock collar. The gesture was so absurdly simple. A sequence of 3 commands on a datapad. A soft click, a brief hiss as the restraint disengaged. Yet its impact was seismic. The collar fell from Seelith's neck with a dull metallic clatter, striking the deck like a fallen crown. She stared at it for a long moment before speaking. Why? She asked again, her voice a low thunder. Why free me when I am already yours? Oren, crouched by the terminal, didn't look up. Because I didn't buy you to own you. Seelith tilted her massive head, amber eyes narrowing. That is what a purchase is, ownership. It doesn't have to be, he said, standing now. I didn't buy you to use you. I bought you to save you. That word, save, landed strangely. It was alien on her tongue and heavier in her chest. No one had spoken of saving a Velithran since the old treaties were broken, since their name had been erased from the census registries, since her people had been reduced to weights and prices. And if I do not wish to be saved, she asked. Oren smiled faintly. Then I'll take you wherever you want to go. A long silence followed. In truth, Seelith did not know where she would go. The Velithra had no homeworld left, their colonies sterilized, their archives destroyed, their memories scattered into myth. She was, as far as she knew, the last of them. The idea of going anywhere was meaningless, and yet, the offer was real. It was more freedom than she had been given in over a century. The lab and the Legend Celestine's central chamber was a labyrinth of workstations, diagnostic pods, and glowing holo interfaces. The walls were lined with biological samples suspended in nutrient gel, genetic sequences streaming in endless columns of light. The space smelled faintly of ozone and sterilizer, with the undercurrent of coffee. Far too much coffee, clinging to the air. This is where I spend most of my time, Orin said as he gestured her inside. Welcome to my lab. Seelith ducked under the bulkhead and stepped into the chamber, her movements careful and deliberate. Everything here was so small, designed for human proportions, fragile under her weight. Yet Orin moved among the consoles with the ease of someone who had lived his whole life surrounded by breakable things. I've been studying species bottlenecks and extinction reversals for almost a decade, he continued, trying to find ways to preserve what's left before it disappears. Your people, the Velithra, were always on my list, but I never thought I'd meet one. Because you thought we were gone, she said flatly. Because they told me you were, Orin corrected. The official records list your extinction date as 113 standard years ago. They were not wrong, Seelith replied. We are gone, not if you're here, he said simply. Seelith's eyes narrowed again. One does not become a people by being one. No, Orin agreed. But one can be a beginning, the science of Hopever the next several days. Seelith watched Orin work. He collected cellular samples from a harmless dermal scrape. He ran sequencing arrays, analyzed mitochondrial drift, mapped epigenetic locks. She understood little of the machinery, but she understood the weight of his intent. Her genome, once dismissed as a dead end, was a treasure trove. It told a story written in the language of stars and time, of a species that had evolved for millennia under harsh radiation and crushing gravity, that had learned to grow slow and live long, that had prioritized strength and memory over fertility. Your reproductive system isn't broken, Orin explained one evening, pulling up a floating holo of her cellular matrix. It's just different. The Velithra evolved with a reproductive cycle measured in centuries. Under natural conditions, your people would have children perhaps once every 100 years, perfectly adapted to your environment. Then why did we stop? She asked, watching the data cascade across the display. Orin's jaw tightened. Because someone made you stop. He highlighted a section of her genome, pulsing red. This isn't natural. It's engineered, a suppression sequence. Very old, but still active. It's preventing ovulation and cellular renewal. If I had to guess, it was introduced centuries ago. Seelith's hands clenched into fists. They sterilized us, not sterilized, Orin said softly. Controlled. Someone wanted the Velithra strong enough to serve, but too weak to rise again. It was a truth Seelith had always suspected, but never confirmed. The idea that her people had simply faded had always felt like a lie. And now, here was the proof, carved into her very flesh. Can it be undone? She asked. I think so, Orin replied. With time. With your help. Clash of wills, but trust was not so easily won. Seelith watched Orin's every movement with suspicion. She listened to his words and dissected them for hidden motives. She tested the boundaries of her freedom, wandering the ship, observing his routines, even deliberately disobeying small requests just to see his reaction. He never raised his voice, never threatened, never reminded her that legally she was his property. You want me to help you, she said one evening, looming over him as he worked. But why should I trust you? You are one of them. I'm not them, Orin said, without looking up. You are human, she snapped. It was humans who slaughtered us, humans who burned our archives, humans who carved chains into our blood. Orin sighed and set his datapad aside. You're right. The admission caught her off guard. You're right, he repeated. Humans did those things. My ancestors did those things, and I hate them for it. But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make the future different. Seelith studied him silently. There was no arrogance in his tone, no empty idealism, just a quiet, stubborn determination. And though she hated to admit it, that stirred something deep within her, something dangerously close to respect. Perhaps, she said at last, I will help you. But not for you. For who then? For them. She looked past the ceiling, beyond the hull, toward the stars where her people's songs still echoed. For those who never had the chance, a dangerous future weeks turned into months. The Celestini traveled the edges of known space, far from the reach of the syndicates and corporations, who would have killed for what Orin now possessed. Together, they pushed deeper into the Velithran genome, unlocking long-dormant pathways, rewriting the sabotage of centuries past. But their work did not go unnoticed. Encrypted messages began to arrive on Orin's comms, first offers, then threats. Anonymous investors offered fortunes for the Velithran specimen. Others promised annihilation if he refused. Syndicate ships were reported in nearby sectors. Hunters began asking questions in the shadow markets, and Seelith knew, as Orin surely did, that their time was running out. You cannot hide forever. She warned one night as they drifted in the dark between systems. They will come for you. For me, I know, Orin said quietly, watching the stars through the observation dome. But they'll find we're not so easy to take. He turned to her then, his expression not of fear but of resolve. We're going to finish this, Seelith, no matter who tries to stop us. For the first time in a century, the last of the Velithra felt the faint stirrings of something she had once believed extinct. Not hope, but purpose. Somewhere, deep in the void, the predators of the galaxy stirred, and the hunt began. But for the first time since her people's fall, Seelith was not prey. She was a storm reborn. And beside her stood a fragile human who had chosen to stand against the universe itself.